A study of Genesis, the book of Genesis in the Bible, the Holy Bible. Genesis 1 starts in King James Version saying, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." From my study of this, as I ponder what it's saying to me, it says, "In the beginning," which to me is the beginning of time and space as we know it. And then it says God, which means to me before the beginning there's this being known as God. And he created, well, later in the scripture we find out it's a he, but he created the heaven and the earth. Other translation says the heavens with a plural, the S at the end, which to me includes the universe as we know it, space and the planets and the stars that we see in the sky, but everything that's visible and invisible in the heavens, and then also on the earth. And then it says the earth was without form and void, which is an interesting concept. As you think about that, you like, he created the heavens and he created the earth, and the next verse literally says, "And the earth was without form, and it was void," and void. And that's conceptually is a bit mind-boggling and hard to really reconcile. It's like, okay, there's this being who created the heavens and the earth, who was around in the beginning, and after acknowledging his creation, there's this creation of a heaven and earth, it states that this earth was without form. And so it says form, and that Hebrew word is tohu, which means confusion, or can be translated formlessness or emptiness. Nothingness, empty space, that which is empty or unreal, wasteland, wilderness. And so it interests me because it's like, it says the earth was without form, or it was formlessness. It was empty. Then it says void. Void is the Hebrew word bohu, which also means emptiness, void, or waste. But considering that, if we go with the premise that God wrote this whole book to us, and he will see soon that he created us in his image, the fact that he uses both of these words means that it's more there than just them saying both their meaning empty. It's got to be some type of different empty, which I'll have to pursue and further research to find out what exactly are the differences between those two words, those two Hebrew words, tohu and bohu. Then it says, "And darkness was over the face of the deep." Now, what also interests me is that it says darkness was upon the face of the deep. So as God created the heavens and the earth in the beginning, so beginning of time and space as we know it, God, being a being who currently is outside of time and space, creates time and space as we know it, and the heavens and the earth. And, well, yes, so because he created time in our understanding in verse 1 when it says in the beginning. So there's a beginning, there's a start point. But then he says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." So we have an earth that's in these heavens that is without form and void, or is emptiness, or a wasteland or a wilderness. And then it tells us that there's darkness, which means there's not light, because darkness is, well, the absence of light. Just as cold as the absence of heat, but that's getting scientific. But which we can do too. But moving on though, so then it says, "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Now, we just completed verse 2, or the reading of verse 2, and we've been introduced to two characters, as it were, God and then the Spirit of God. Now, the question would be, is that the same person? Are they the same thing? Or is there a difference? And my assumption would start off being there must be a difference because there's a delineation between them. There's a identification, identifying them separately or differently than the same. Because if it was, to me, in normal writings, you would say, if you're talking about the same person, you use the same term that you used to identify that person originally. So you would think you'd say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and God moved upon the face of the waters. But it didn't say God moved upon the face of the waters. It says the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So to me, again, there's this separation, there's this articulation of a different identity that's being spoken of. Verse 3 says, "And God said, let there be light." And now we have the introduction of light. And then it says, "And there was light." It's really interesting to me also because you just thinking about the things that are being said and the things that are not being said. So in verse 3 it says, "And God said," so now we're talking about the same character that was mentioned in verse 1. Actually, we should probably take that back to the Hebrew, but that's another point. But he says, God said, "Let there be light." And then it says, right after that, "And there was light." Now, why that's interesting to me is because it's like this is a confirmation of after he said it, it was. But what's interesting is that it doesn't have that confirmation in verse 2, where it says, it does actually as a confirmation because it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then in verse 2, it says, "And the earth was without form and void." But when you contrast that with verse 3, it says, God said, "Let there be light." And then it says, "And there was light." So if verse 3, using that terminology, and going back to verse 2, you have to ask this question, why, verse 1 and verse 2, it says, why in verse 1, it says God created the heavens and the earth, or God created the heaven, and the earth, we're talking about the earth, and then which is also another point, but verse 2 it says, "And the earth was without form and void." So it doesn't say, "And the earth was," which would be the equivalent of when he's talking about light. He says, "And God created God said, let there be," no, that's another point, it says, "Let there be light," as opposed to him creating light. It just says, "Let there be light." So it's not identifying or saying that he created light. It's saying he spoke light and said, "Let there be light." In other words, let that light shine. And in contrast with verse 2, where it tells us that the earth had darkness upon the face of the waters, which is also, because you're like, well, where do the waters come from? And then the water's part of the earth, and that's the assumption we start off with. But we'll get there. We're going to get there. It's a whole lot here. It's interesting. But finding that contrast between, or the thoughts between verse 3, where he says, just let there be light. It doesn't say God created light, it's just let there be light. And then there's a confirmation and there was light. But then God created the earth. And the confirmation, as it were, of the earth was it was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the water of the deep. Which we'll have to spend time going through these really, but we're just introduction on this. But let's go to verse 4. Let's move forward. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So, by verse 4, we've established that, okay, God said, let there be light. So he spoke light, stating, let there be light. And light was. And then there's this confirmation, there was light. And then God saw the light, that it was good. Which brings into a whole other concept or thought process that, so God saw the light. It didn't say that God saw the earth. But God saw the light, and then he says, he acknowledges that it was good. So the light was good, but he didn't say the earth was good. He didn't say the heavens was good at this point. And then in verse 4, as it continues, it says, and God divided the light from the darkness. So then he causes this division, this separation, this way of identifying light from darkness, which is an interesting concept, because it's like, well, before he divided the light, was the light part of the darkness? Or, all kinds of theories there. So verse 5 says, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And so it's interesting because he says it's the evening is identified first, and then the morning. And that completed the first day. So thinking about, he called the day the light, he called the light day, and he called the darkness night. We saw in verse 2 that darkness was upon the face of the deep, when speaking of the earth was without form and void. So you had darkness, and then in verse 3, God said, let there be light. So he spoke, there be light, let there be light, and there was light. And then he separates the light from the darkness in verse 4. And after saying he saw that the light was good. So he saw that the light was good, which is like a blessing upon the light. And then he divides the light from the darkness and calls the light day and the darkness night. And thinking those things through, then it says, in the evening and the morning were the first day. And it used to bother me or ponder me, get me wondering. It's like, why throughout the scripture you see the evening and then the morning. The evening comes first and then the morning. In my time, we say the beginning of the day is in the morning, and then at the end of the day is the evening. But here in the Bible, it says the evening was first, and then the morning completes the day. And thinking about that based off of what we saw in the first 5 verses in Genesis chapter 1, we see darkness was there first, and then God spoke light. He just said, let there be light. And light was. And then he separates this light from this darkness. But the darkness was there first. And so logically, I suppose you could say the day started with darkness. And then when the light came, that completed the day as he has identified it. That's interesting. We'll have to continue this because I perceive my time has come up for this session. Thank you for joining.